I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I am really excited to be joined by Afonso Salema, CEO of Start Campus. Afonso, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to get to hear about what you guys are doing.
It's a pleasure to be here and nice to see you again.
Yeah, I think last time we connected was in Hawaii, so obviously Zoom will work for now, but hopefully next time it can be close to the beach again. Before we jump in, you have a very interesting background. It's always interesting to hear how people got into the data center space, but I think yours specifically is interesting. Just kind of what part of the working world you came from. So just talk about that. Like, how did you start in the data center world, and what was your background before?
Yeah, of course. So at the onset, I'm an industrial engineer at heart, so that's what I major in. Although I've been always tied to the investment side of the business, and I've stayed slightly short of 20 years into investment banking, where I focused mostly on infrastructure, utilities, large projects, those and pure advisory roles. So advising private equity firms, advising utilities on their investment strategies, dealt with renewables in China, in Chile. Europe is fairly easy compared with those jurisdictions. Hydro plants in Africa, coal, gas plants in the UK and Germany, even nuclear, and all the entire chain of the infrastructure space.
Well, and yeah, I think, and it's that background that I think is really, it seems like it's prepared you very well for some of the work that you're doing with the Start Campus. Talk about that and the strategy that you'll have. Talk about the development, and then what's the strategy behind it.
No, and that's actually where the idea stemmed from. So one of the realizations that we had pre-2020 was that there are two major trends going on in the globe right now. You have the first secular trend is the power transition. And regardless on which technology you're going to win and how different countries are looking at it, one thing is certain: you will have less coal installed around the world. There's a shift towards endogenous sources like renewables to gain as energy independency, and that train is not going to stop regardless of what happens. Whether you believe in global warming or not, that train is not stopping. And in its wake, it will leave behind a lot of really, really nice infrastructure. So if you look into, the easiest is always a coal power plant. Look into a coal power plant, an old one. If you take away the polluting bit, you're left with some amazing access to that facility. Probably you have road and rail. You'll be at the heart of the power grid. So you have undisputed access to that grid. You have sophisticated cooling solutions that have worked for decades at the industrial scale. And quite often you have pretty strong connectivity, given that these facilities need to be managed real time and they're deemed to be critical infrastructure. So you have all of that if you take out the dirty bit. And on a social scale, you'll see a lot of towns and a lot of communities that have developed around it. And once you start removing it, if you don't have a backup plan or what to do with that, you actually disenfranchise an entire range of the population, which is not good. Which is not good and shouldn't be on our sustainable goals. So when you talk with utilities, one of the things I found more surprising, they always came back with the same answer: oh no, we're going to do biomass because we saw one project that worked well with biomass, so we're going to do biomass. And that has been the promise of the last 20 years that never materialized. So I always thought it has to be more than that. And then you have the second trend, which is the digital transition. And on the digital transition, the data centers are at the core, are really at the core. And what's funny about data centers is that they've came as a very niche asset, to the point that you still have a wide range of people that still think that data centers are just overspec logistics centers. Completely wrong. They're moving towards a much more industrialized operation, where you have I measure the what's called industrialization by the number of concurrent systems that you need to manage, as well as the amount of resources that you need to use. So the data center industry is growing into much more resource intense, much more complex in terms of managing those facilities, and it didn't make sense to have the same hat of I just find a space, an office space there, I'll try to make it a data center out of it. It just doesn't make sense when you look at the topography of the connected world and how that is evolving. The large scale deployments have been shown to be one of the key driving factors of the hyperscalers, why they've been competing so well into the market, and that shows where the trends should go. So when you merge these two trends, you have quite a unique strategy, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking hold of facilities facilities that were being left behind. We're rejuvenating a dirty, let's call it a dirty area, because it was, you had 60 hectares of cold fields. That's really huge black mass close to these beautiful beaches. This beach is beautiful. It's amazing. Yeah. It's an amazing surfing beach. And we take away that nasty piece, but we recycle the best of that infrastructure in order to enable the next generation of infrastructure. And that's where the whole thesis came about. We scouted, and our initial work was only focused in Europe. Yep. That's what we're more familiar with, and how we can add more value. And on our initial work, we scouted roughly 550 sites.
Wow.
And where we can meet all of the big elements to make a successful data center. And Sinus came on the top 10. So that's where we started.
For those that are talking about the you kind of call it the power transition, or focusing more on renewables and figuring out how to make that transition, what are some of the challenges that y'all have faced, or that you see the industry facing, to actually get to that point, where they people
that's a very good question,
and will go down that road to do it?
That's a very good question. I think the biggest where I'll split it into the first level challenge, and then we'll go to some details. So the first challenge is that most of the players still think that by taking sustainable options, it's an additional cost. It actually it's like and some people still treat it as it's an added tax. It's a green invisible tax that I need to add to my operations, and it's just going to mess everything around. So to get out of that mentality and actually embed sustainability into your core in a way that actually you'll have cheaper operations, you'll have a much more resilient asset. That's the biggest challenge. That's the first biggest challenge. And truth be told, I don't see many who see it that who have shifted already. But the reality is, it is possible. It's not by chance that solar is the lowest cost of power that exists in the world today, if you know how to deploy it. The second challenge is when you do these very strong and hard commitments on sustainability, some of them, they look really good on marketing and are quite challenging on real life. Like 24/7, being able to source power 24/7 in order not to be accused of greenwashing means that you really need to know power. Yep. There's no excuse. You can just say, oh, these guys have a green envelope, so probably their power is green, I'm buying it. Or I just buy CO2 licenses, my power is green. It doesn't quite work like that. You actually need to know where you're sourcing your power, how those resources behave, how can you tackle your consumption with that power in order to meet that 24/7. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Well, not only hyperscalers, but utilities and large consumers have today, which how to meet that challenge, how to rise up to that challenge. And it's something that we are able to do, given our unique way on how to look into power delivery into the data center. And I think that's one of the biggest. And then you go to the other components of what entails sustainability. It's not only power; it's also you need to look at other resources that you're looking at, like water consumption. How can you avoid any water consumption? Better yet, how can you be a net water producer into the communities that you're in? Is that even possible? And second, what's your embedded carbon? Are you actually tracking your carbon? Do you know how much carbon your facility has? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to do anything about it? And are you going just to pay a fee to someone on the other side of the world to tell you that they've planted trees on your behalf? Or are you actually working with the communities around? Those are some of the biggest challenges if you want to do a truly sustainable strategy.
Yeah, and that's the evolution in the space right now that we're seeing, certainly on the power side. And it's going to have to continue. I think if data center operators and investors want to invest in solutions long term that will provide the type of sustainability from a power standpoint that it's going to take to do the things that you're talking about. Another evolution that we've seen is almost in some ways a geographical shift, where a lot of the investment for data center campuses over the last probably 5 to 8 years has been like near larger cities. So, if we think in Europe, it would be like around, in Frankfurt. If it's, in London, it's kind of in the larger, city areas. Now we're starting to see those deployments geographically be placed kind of outside of the larger cities into different areas. So talk about that strategy. That certainly is part of the strategy that's a very good. And why is that happening?
So I think it's funny that you say now you're seeing it, because if you look, and when we started looking into this, we actually looked at behavior, several of the larger deployments across the globe and how these evolved. And we saw that hyperscalers, yes, some of them, they tend to be very close to metro areas. But if they can, they're actually away from it. And I think only now the rest of the industry is moving towards that. Sure. And there's a very easy there are several explanations. I think the one that I like the most is that it's much easier to move a photon than an electron. So it's much easier to move data than actually to move power and to have your power your power strategy behind it. So that's element number one. But then there's another subtle element which I think is becoming more and more relevant, which is data centers, given that they've come from a real estate world, they are perceived as competing against the resources that would be available to real estate assets. And what I mean is data centers have this really bad reputation that they're taking away new houses and new offices. They have this really bad reputation because they're being put under the same bucket. When if you look and where the industry is headed and the type of I'll call it again industrialization of data, you should compare it with industry. And if
Mhm.
you compare it with industry, which is outside of the big urban areas, actually on areas which are catered to industry deployments. If you compare with that, um, data centers win by a mile. They're always a better option, always. And that's a way that you can move either nasty neighborhoods which were industry intensive, or areas close to metro, or even new areas, uh, moving away from the dark industry type of connotation into a greener shift, and without competing with the same resources. Because when you're in an industrial area, no one is checking how much power you're dragging or how much water and
Sure.
so on.
Yeah.
Well, they are, but given the surrounding context, you're
Yep.
probably much better than anyone else.
Sure. Yeah. So it's
So,
totally different lens that they're evaluating that type of use versus the other. I totally agree.
and then the communities around you will say, you're our savior. You're bringing something
Yeah.
really interesting,
Sure.
really interesting to this industry only focused area.
Yeah. It's one of the um, really fascinating, I think, things to watch over the last probably 3 to 5 years, especially if you look at like the US and Europe and APAC as well, like how communities and different groups have responded to data center development. And historically, what has been accepted and attractive now in certain areas is certainly not, to your point earlier. And then where there is abandoned infrastructure, coal plants that you talked about that you're going to decommission and utilize that infrastructure for other things, or other places that, areas that have been left behind by other industries. You're right. You use the term savior. It's like they've come in and they're utilizing infrastructure that, has been there. So that's a really good point. How do you, when you think about Start Campus 3-5 years from now, and I would say you all are doing some pretty innovative things there, but what are some of the maybe areas of focus from an innovation standpoint that you all want to continue to focus on, or, new focuses that there will be in the next few years?
Well, there's several. There are several. It depends on which area you want to focus. There are several challenges. One, and we have several initiatives. On the power side, is how do you integrate data center operations actually with the entire grid? How can you move from a passive element into a power grid to an active element? What does this mean? It means that as entire countries are trying to move towards renewables, they need large players to help them manage the grid. They really do. It's not going to be your standard Joe who's going to switch on and switch off the light in order for the grid not to go out. It's going to be the large players who will help manage the grid, as the old power stations used to do. Now has to come from the consumption side, and the data centers have a tremendous opportunity to be part of something much bigger on that front. When you look into cooling, when you look the needs for cooling, especially with the emergence of the AI and the much more intense workloads, you will start having, it's still low grade, but it's a very useful low grade heat. How can you integrate with your neighbors? What can you do with it?
Yep.
And I know if you're talking the Nordics, everyone says district heating. Well, newsflash, district heating does not work everywhere in the world. It doesn't make sense, because the sheer investment into infrastructure renders it quite a useless way of resources. But there are several other alternatives which can be quite interesting. So you can use it for a desal facility, for example. You could use it with neighbor industries who have a useful find some usefulness on that low grade heat. And you need to keep on looking into these, and we're also looking into how do we do carbon mitigation and compensation to completely neutralize our position. So there are several initiatives that we're very happy embarking on, which we hope to see some of them bearing fruit that will drive the next development and the next and the next. And that's how you need to be thinking about data centers. You cannot think it, yes, this is a real long-term asset, but it has tremendous potential for all this innovation while still maintaining the criticality of operations and being always on.
Yeah, that's good. And okay, so last question from your standpoint, you're CEO of Start Campus, leading the, this innovative long-term solution that you all have there in Portugal. How do you, if you think about the industry in 5-10 years from now, you are talking to the biggest users in the space, you're listening to what their challenges are. What do you think are going to make the biggest impacts on our space as a whole? I mean, certainly it's sustainability, which we've talked about, but what are some of the other takeaways that you've heard, about that you feel like will make like a significant impact on our industry?
I think it's connectivity. It all comes to connectivity. I think there's going to be an explosion, or you already see the seeds of it. There's going to be an explosion of connectivity across the globe. The globe is going to be much more intertwined, and when you have the low orbit satellites also on, it means that you have a new axis to tap on. So that tremendous amount of connectivity will drive how data centers interact, not only as a standalone basis, but with all other ones. So I do see that what we're building, you'll see a couple of some of them being built around the world, and then you won't have your standard metro edge nodes. You have way more nodes, because that connectivity allows you for that. But smaller ones, you have smaller nodes with much larger capacity behind it to service those nodes. And it will be the interaction between these two that will make a much better user experience, and sparsely driven out of connectivity. I think the connectivity drivers are not only AI. It's not only AI or the sheer amount of data that is growing each year. I think there's a more fundamental one which is driving it, which is geopolitics. And geopolitics demands that you have all that resilience and a much tighter connectivity mesh to avoid potential issues on a global scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the network piece has become so much more important. And I think probably with your background and certainly the campus that you will have, I mean, you have a very global view of our business and our space. And there really is a globalization of our industry taking place, for years and years. And there still are micro trends happening in maybe the US that aren't happening in Europe, or Europe that aren't happening in APAC. But more than ever, these areas are experiencing a lot of the same challenges. And, the one thing that will drive the efficiency of all these, besides certainly the sustainability piece, is also the connectivity side. Well, Afonso, thank you so much for taking time to connect with us. It's really fun to see the progress and just in the backdrop of your screen right here. I know for people that are interested, you can get on Start Campus's website, and they've got great information about what they're doing there. You can also connect with Afonso and his team as well. Afonso, thanks again, and we look forward to connecting again soon in the future.
Thank you. And perhaps next time we'll be drinking something around here.
There we go. Absolutely. Talk soon.
Cheers.